Hi, my name is Dana Harmon, and I will be presenting my research on Taylor Swift and modern feminism. So when you think of Taylor Swift, you probably think of breakup anthems, the Eras Tour, and maybe even that scarf that she left at Jake Gyllenhaal's place. But underneath all of that pop culture buzz, there's something deeper going on, something tied to how we think about feminism in America today. Over the years, Taylor Swift has gone from a teenage country star writing love songs about fairy tales to someone who's publicly calling out sexism, standing up for artists' rights, and openly identifying as a feminist. And in a lot of ways, that journey mirrors the evolution of feminism itself, from focusing on basic rights and representation to taking on issues like intersectionality and media power. That's what I'm exploring today. How does Taylor Swift's evolving career reflect both the progress and limitations of mainstream feminism in the U.S.? And does her version of feminism actually help push the movement forward, or does it mostly just serve her brand? My take? Swift has definitely helped bring feminist ideas into the spotlight, especially for younger audiences. But her brand of feminism is often individualistic and rooted in privilege. And that raises bigger questions about what happens when celebrity culture and activism start to blur. To really understand how Taylor Swift fits into feminism, we need to take a quick step back and look at how feminism itself has changed over time. So in the US, feminism has gone through these different waves, and each wave focuses on different kinds of issues. The first wave, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, was all about getting women the right to vote. The second wave then came along in the 1960s and 70s, and that one focused more on things like workplace rights, reproductive freedom, and legal equality. But even those early waves made big strides, they weren't perfect. They mainly focused on the needs of white, middle-class women and left a lot of other voices out. That's where the third wave, in the 1990s and early 2000s, stepped in. It introduced the idea of intersectionality, which basically means realizing that gender inequality doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's connected to race, class, sexuality, and other parts of someone's identity. Then came the fourth wave, which we are in now. This wave is all about activism in the digital age, calling out sexism on social media, pushing for systemic change, and making feminism more inclusive and global. Taylor Swift's career has moved alongside these waves. In the beginning, her songs like Love Story and You Belong With Me leaned into traditional ideas about love and femininity. That kind of fit into this post-feminist mindset, a belief that feminism already did its job, and now women should just focus on empowerment through personal choices and success. But later in her career, especially around 2014 and beyond, we see Swift becoming more vocal, calling herself a feminist, speaking out about double standards, and advocating for things like LGBTQ+ rights and artist ownership. That shift matches a lot with what fourth wave feminism is all about: being loud, being political, and trying to take back control of your own story. Alright, so let's talk about the music, because honestly, that's where a lot of Taylor's feminist messaging shows up, whether it's subtle or straight up in your face. When she first started out, Taylor was writing songs that were super relatable, but very rooted in traditional gender roles. Think You Belong With Me. She's the girl next door, pinning after a guy who's dating the cheer captain. It's a whole storyline about competing for male attention, and her self-worth kind of revolves around whether this guy notices her. A lot of her early songs follow with that same pattern. Sweet, emotional, very romantic, but not exactly pushing back on the system. That's where the post-feminism thing comes in again, where it feels empowering but doesn't really challenge gender roles in a deep way. But then around 2014, we start seeing a shift. Swift publicly identifies as a feminist for the first time, and her music gets way more outspoken. A great example is The Man from her Lover album. That song is basically a giant eye roll at all the double standards women face. She sings, "I'm so sick of running as fast as I can, wondering if I'd get there quicker if I was a man." And in the music video, she literally dresses up as a dude and walks through the world with unchecked power just to show how different things might be. Another moment that stands out is her sexual assault trial in 2017, where she countersued a DJ for $1 and won. It wasn't about the money, it was symbolic. She used her platform to say, "I believe survivors," and that took guts, especially in a very public courtroom. Then there's Who's Afraid of Little Old Me from her newest album, The Tortured Poets Department. That song gets deep. It's about how women who speak up or take space are seen as too much or crazy. The line, "You wouldn't last an hour in the asylum where they raised me," is so powerful. It connects to this long history of women being dismissed or institutionalized just for challenging the status quo. Outside of her lyrics, she's also done things like calling out Apple Music for not paying artists fairly and re-recording her albums to take back ownership of her work. That's not just a business move, it's a feminist one. But here's where it gets complicated. While a lot of people praise her for speaking up, she's also been critiqued for how limited her activism can be. Like, yes, she talks about gender equality and LGBTQ plus rights, but what about race, class, economic justice? There's this ongoing debate about whether feminism is truly inclusive or if it just mainly reflects her experience as a wealthy white woman in the spotlight. So, is Taylor Swift actually a feminist icon, or is she just really good at branding herself as one? Honestly, it's kind of both. She's done a lot to bring feminist conversations into the mainstream, especially for fans who might not have thought about things like gender double standards or power dynamics before. And that visibility matters. Not everyone's going to read feminist theory, but they will listen to a Taylor Swift song on repeat. So in a way, she's opened the door for people to start thinking about these issues. But here's where we have to zoom out a little bit. A lot of her critiques about Swift's feminism come down to intersectionality, basically whether her activism includes people who aren't white, straight, or wealthy. And that's where she's gotten pushback. For example, she's spoken out about LGBTQ plus rights and gender inequality, but she was really quiet during the height of the Black Lives Matter movement. So the question becomes, is she choosing causes that feel safe for her brand? It's not a new problem. If we look back at someone like Betty Friedan, who was a major figure in second-wave feminism, she also left out a lot of marginalized voices, focusing mostly on white, middle-class women. So maybe Swift is just continuing a pattern that's already existed in mainstream feminism. But is that an excuse, or is it something she should be working to change? We can also compare her to other celebrities who've been tied to feminism. Madonna in the 80s and 90s pushed boundaries around sexuality and female agency, but her messaging wasn't exactly intersectional either. Beyoncé, on the other hand, has brought race and gender into her art more directly. Just look at Lemonade. She's talked openly about the struggles Black women face and has collaborated with scholars to bring those conversations into the spotlight. So where does that leave Taylor? I'd say she exists in this middle ground. She's clearly made progress from where she started, and she's used her platform for good in a lot of ways. But she's also benefited from a feminist image that's very palatable, very marketable. Scholar Bell Hooks has critiqued this kind of feminism as one that centers whiteness and individual success stories instead of collective liberation. And honestly, that criticism fits Swift pretty well. Still, I think it's important to give credit where it's due. She's made feminist language and ideas more accessible. She's challenged industry norms. But we also have to recognize the limits of what celebrity feminism can achieve, especially when it's more about personal empowerment than systemic change. When it comes to feminism, intersectionality is key. It's the idea that gender inequality doesn't affect all women the same way. Race, class, and sexuality all play a role. And this is where Taylor Swift's feminism gets complicated. She's done meaningful things like advocating for LGBTQ plus rights and speaking out about sexism, but critics have pointed out that she rarely addresses race or economic inequality. During movements like Black Lives Matter, for example, her support was cautious and delayed. That silence made people question whether her activism is more about maintaining her brand than pushing for real systemic change. This isn't a new issue. Feminists like Betty Friedan were also critiqued for excluding women of color and working-class women. So Swift might just be continuing a pattern that always existed in mainstream feminism, one that centers privileged voices and leaves others out. At the same time, it's important to recognize that her platform gives her a level of safety and visibility that others don't have. When women of color speak out, they often face harsher backlash. So even the way Swift's feminism is received is shaped by privilege. Career is more than just a music evolution. It's a reflection of how feminism in America has shifted over time, from traditional roles and personal empowerment to public advocacy and reclaiming her power in male-dominated spaces. She's helped bring feminist ideas into the mainstream, especially for younger fans. But her activism isn't perfect, and it often reflects the same limitations that have existed in mainstream feminism for decades. It's powerful, yes, but also privileged and selective. Still, that doesn't mean it doesn't matter. Her influence has opened up important conversations about gender, agency, and identity. And if nothing else, it challenges us to keep asking who gets to define feminism, and how can we make it more inclusive moving forward.